Welcome to Music Explored. I'm David Rivas, and today we're going to talk about the second fundamental concept of music, pitch. When people talk about the notes you hear in music, they're usually talking about pitch. The rise and fall of a melodic line, harmonious intervals and chords, and the conflict and tension between dissonant notes that leads to a satisfying resolution. This is the concept of pitch, which comes from the underlying concept of frequency. As mentioned before, frequency is the number of oscillations in the sound wave per second, or hertz. This is a scientifically measurable number, generated by any object as it produces sound. Your refrigerator, cars driving down the road, a door closing, all have frequencies that can be measured. Lower sounds come with lower numbered frequencies, but are usually made by larger objects. Higher sounds come from higher frequencies, but in turn are usually made by smaller objects. Frequency is all around us, some of it in nature, some of it man-made. Pitch, on the other hand, is more selective. We assign particular names to selected frequencies in a repeating pattern, which we call notes, leaving the frequencies between those notes as off-key. Since it's fairly arbitrary, many cultures have different groups of notes. One reason why music from the other side of the globe can sound so jarring is because they may have a completely different set of notes to work with, informed by their history, resources, and culture. Our music may sound just as jarring to them. So while frequency is pretty broad but measurable, pitch is more selective but varies from culture to culture. We may focus on some of those cultural scales from around the world later on, but for today, we're going to tackle the Western scale, one widely used in Europe and the Americas. Furthermore, there are actually two types of pitch, definite and indefinite. Definite pitches are sounds that have identifiable notes. Indefinite pitches, on the other hand, are either difficult to identify or don't match the definite pitches in music. Voices and many instruments are definite pitched, like pianos and guitars. Several entire groups or families of instruments are definite pitched, including woodwinds, brass, and strings. Percussion instruments are mixed. Some are definite pitched, like the marimba or timpani, while others are indefinite, like the snare drum, toms, and castanets. Basically, if it's part of a drum set, part of a drum line, or usually held in the hand when playing, it's probably indefinite. For today, we're going to focus on definite pitch. Later on, when we talk specifically about percussion instruments, we'll engage more with the idea of indefinite pitch. The range we can hear as humans has an impact on what kind of music we make. It wouldn't make any sense to play notes that are outside the range of human hearing. Young, healthy adults have a hearing range that's typically about 20 hertz up to 20,000 hertz or 20 kilohertz. This range decreases as we age, especially on the higher end. Thankfully, most of our notes fall well within this threshold, as notes that are above 10 kilohertz tend to sound rather piercing. In Western music, the range of instruments runs from 20 hertz all the way up to 4 kilohertz. Most don't have this entire range, being more specialized, such as the trumpet, guitar, clarinet, and violin. Families of instruments have a large combined range. For example, the piccolo of the woodwind family has very high notes but can't go low, while on the other end, the bassoon can't get very high but has some truly low notes. The keyboard instruments have the largest range for a single instrument, which helps them to substitute for other instruments as needed. One thing that helps us navigate on our instruments is knowing how to move to higher or lower notes. Two very common instruments today are the piano and guitar, so let's talk about both. As we go from left to right on the keyboard, we go to higher notes, and vice versa. On the guitar, moving in on the fretboard moves us higher, and moving from a thick string to a thinner string skips to a higher range. Moving either in the opposite direction leads to lower notes. Even though many of the pitches change between various cultures, there's still a universal principle, the octave. An octave is the distance or interval between two notes, one being half or double the frequency of the first. The octave is a very consonant or harmonious interval, because the sound of the frequencies is basically the same, just in a higher or lower range. The variation between different cultures comes not from whether they have an octave, but from how they divide the octave. How many notes fit between the octaves? And how far apart are those notes in their frequency? So while there are differences between cultures and their music, the octave gives us a connection, while also functioning as the strongest and clearest interval. Our Western scale has developed over centuries, changing over time to reflect the kinds of music being written. Currently, we have 12 notes per octave, using a tuning system we call equal temperament. Equal temperament means an even ratio relationship between notes. This ratio is 1.05946, or an increase of 5.946% per note. As we go higher in notes, the absolute distance and frequency between them increases. This system had been suggested for centuries, but was only widely adopted during the 1800s, replacing other systems that had less of an even relationship between notes, such as the well-tempered, mean tone, and Pythagorean systems. Equal temperament allows us to play in any tonal center, or key, and have it sound reasonably harmonious. Some of the previous systems prioritized certain keys over others. While certain intervals would sound particularly sweet in a few of the keys, in other keys those same intervals would sound particularly dissonant. And so the choice was made to move towards something which was a little more egalitarian. Like many things, it's a trade-off between one good or another, depending on what you want to do with it. The equal temperament system is logarithmic, or increasing exponentially over time. As we move higher and higher in the scale, the space between two adjacent notes gets bigger and bigger and bigger over time. On the piano, the two lowest keys are less than 2 Hz apart, but the space between the two highest keys is 235 Hz. The distance between two adjacent notes in the Western system is called a half step. Combining two of these steps together is called a whole step. We see half steps on the keyboard by moving from one key to the very next, whether black or white, and on the guitar when we move from one fret to the next. We see whole steps on the keyboard by skipping a key, and on the guitar by skipping a fret. These steps will be extremely important in just a bit. We label certain keys of the Western scale with the alphabet. We start with A, continue sequentially through G, and then repeat the pattern over and over. On the keyboard, we label the white keys as letters. Notice that the group of black keys are units of 2 and 3, except at the far low end, where we have just 1. This layout helps us to keep track of where we are on the instrument. To identify the black keys, we use modifiers we call sharps and flats. These raise and lower the standard or natural letters to the note just above or below them, often moving a white key to a black key. We have the same sharps and flats on other instruments, but it's easiest to see with the difference between white and black keys on the keyboard layout. Thanks for following along so far, everybody. I had hoped to continue this discussion by going straight into some specific examples of scales, which is a combination of certain types of notes in our Western system. However, the editing process made it clear that that's just too much for one video to put all together. So we're going to hold that footage for next time, where we go in depth to the idea of major and minor scales, how to build them, and how you can understand them today. Stay tuned for that shortly. Remember, leave questions in the comments below, like the Facebook page for production updates, and subscribe to the YouTube channel for updates about future videos. Thanks again, and keep exploring.